name is Elizabeth Manns, and I'd like to welcome you to the April 4th Coalition Show. This is the June 17th, 2024 edition of the show. The April 4th Coalition's mission statement is, we are for workers' rights and collective bargaining rights, are against tax breaks for the rich and corporations who ship our jobs overseas. We support all the articles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but as is our custom, we put the emphasis on Article 23, and just to switch things up, I'm going to do number 1. Dick is number 2.
No, I'm 2.
You're 2, Sue is number 2, Dick is number 3, and Mike is number 4. So, here we go. Number 1, everyone has the right to work, to free choice of employment, to just and favorable conditions of work, and protection against unemployment.
Number 2, everyone without any discrimination has the right to equal pay for equal work.
Number 3, everyone who works has the right to just and favorable remuneration, ensuring for him or herself and his or her family an existence worthy of human dignity and supplemented, if necessary, by other means of social protection.
Michael.
Number 4, everyone has the right to form and join trade unions for the protection of his or her interests. Thank
you. And as always, we'd like to give a thank you and a shout out to Michael Putnam, who is the program director for WMNB LP 107.1, which is the public access radio station, or airing the audio portion of our shows on Friday at 6 p.m. And a very huge thank you to Joanne Hurlbut, David Fabiano, Nicole A. Brown for their invaluable assistance in helping us produce the show. Dick, you brought in some props today,
yes.
And we thought we'd do one reminding
yes.
people of what we stand in solidarity.
Right. This sign was made when the workers at Berkshire Gas were locked out of their jobs, and we thought we weren't going to be able to show any videos today, so I brought these in. But Liz thought it was a good idea that we show it.
I think we're going to do it anyway. So here we go. We are in solidarity with those locked out of their jobs, those who face plant closings, those who are working without a contract, the unemployed and underemployed, all organized and unorganized workers, those who lack decent shelter, all that lack adequate food, those who lack decent and affordable health care, those children who will attend underfunded schools, and those who seek a more peaceful world. Just about is everything in the world.
That's what we're in solidarity, like that song Solidarity Forever.
Yep.
But we have a video that we wanted to show with Robert Reich, and it's on the history of corporations being people.
Ah, yes. The lovely one that are businesses. We love that. That's Supreme Court.
What's the difference between you and a giant corporation like Amazon? According to the Supreme Court, nothing. Corporations are apparently people with the same free speech rights under the Constitution that you and I have. But wait, if corporations break the law, they can't be imprisoned. You can be. Corporations can't be executed. If you commit a felony in a state like Texas, you could be. Corporations that cause accidents or go bankrupt enjoy limited liability, so their investors are off the hook. If you cause an accident or go bankrupt, you're on the hook. And since corporations are just collections of legal agreements, they can live forever. You can't. Worse yet, while they can't actually vote in elections like real people, they can spend virtually unlimited money influencing politics. So how did corporations get turned into people? And who opened the door to their influence over our elections? Thank the Supreme Court. It began in the wake of the Watergate scandal when Congress amended the Federal Election Campaign Act in hopes of preventing future corruption. The amendments limited campaign contributions for individuals as well as spending by candidates and outside groups. A group of senators led by James L. Buckley of New York sued, claiming the law violated candidates' First Amendment rights. In its 1976 Buckley versus Valeo ruling, the Supreme Court agreed with Buckley that the limits on spending were, quote, direct and substantial restraints on the quantity of political speech, and therefore unconstitutional. Thus, the notion that money is speech was born, and the door to corporate political dominance was unlocked. Next came the 1978 case, First National Bank of Boston versus Bellotti. A group of banks and corporations challenged a Massachusetts law limiting corporations' ability to run political ads. They found a sympathetic ear with Supreme Court Justice Lewis Powell, who before he became a justice authored the infamous memo to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce calling for more corporate money in American politics. By the way, we have a whole video about the Powell memo. In his majority opinion, Justice Powell wrote that the ads the corporations wanted to run were, quote, the type of speech indispensable to decision-making in a democracy, and this is no less true because the speech comes from a corporation rather than an individual. With that ruling, the court established that corporations are people with the same First Amendment rights as you and me, allowing them to get their foot in the door to take over elections. These cases laid the groundwork for Citizens United in 2010. The court's conservative justices decided that any restrictions on independent political spending by corporations were unconstitutional. The door for corporate influence in politics was finally kicked wide open. Not only were corporations people who could spend money on politics, but they had the right to drown our democracy with as much money as they wanted. The irony is that while the Supreme Court has been busy granting corporations more power to influence elections, they've been stripping actual people of their power to influence elections. In 2013, the Supreme Court gutted the 1965 Voting Rights Act in Shelby County versus Holder. The conservative justices' ruling stripped the pre-clearance requirement that states with a history of voter suppression must receive clearance from the federal government before enacting any new voting laws. The court essentially ruled that the racial voter suppression that the Voting Rights Act was intended to guard against no longer existed. In the years since, the very same states that were previously subjected to pre-clearance have passed a wave of voter suppression laws. Unsurprisingly, these laws disproportionately affect voters of color. The result? Corporations, legal fictions, held together by collections of contracts, have more power in our democracy than many real people. But these aren't fundamental American principles. They're relatively new ideas concocted by conservatives on the Supreme Court and their deep-pocketed allies. The door to corporate influence can and must be shut again. First, we need a president and Congress committed to getting big money out of politics. That means overturning Citizens United, publicly funding elections, and putting the guardrails back on corporate political spending. While we're slashing the power of corporations, we need to increase the power of the people. Congress needs to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which restores the 1965 Voting Rights Act to its full power, so states can no longer pass voter suppression laws. Finally, we need a Supreme Court that will affirm that money is not speech and corporations are not people. We can get big money out of politics, restore voting rights, and make sure our democracy answers to you, not corporations, once and for all.
I love John Wright. You wanted to show the fascism.
Well, it sort of ties in, I don't know if you think so, but
I
when
think
talk
it
about
does.
corporations and them influencing our government by buying our congressmen. Will Rogers said it a long time ago, we got the best politicians money can buy.
We still do. The problem is the wrong money is buying them at this point.
Right, it's it. We're up for sale. But this is a definition of fascism that I took out of a dictionary. It was an old dictionary that was given to me by, I think, my great uncle, and it was produced during the 1930s. One of the things the WPA did, the Work Progress Administration, not only did they build bridges and build our sewer lines and build Mount Greylock with the CCP, they also paid writers to write books. And this dictionary was funded in the 1930s by the Works Progress Administration, and the writers were paid to write the dictionary.
Okay.
And this was, the pictures in the dictionary of all the flags, at this time when this was written in there, the German flag had a swastika. That was in the picture in the dictionary.
Right.
So it says,
You want me to do it?
yeah,
Okay, fascism, a political and economic movement strongly nationalistic, magnifying the rights of the state as opposed to those of the individual, in which both industry, though remaining largely under private ownership, and all administrative political units are controlled by a strong central government.
yeah, which is controlled by corporations.
In this case, in our
Yes.
case, it's controlled by the corporations.
Right, the thing about a corporation, unlike a human being, it doesn't bleed. It doesn't have,
Doesn't have feelings.
there has one goal. A corporation's, the only goal of a corporation
Is money.
is to make more money.
It has no
Conscience.
no soul, no
No heart.
no heart. And frankly, if they're going to be limiting the individual person's speech or taking away voting rights, my personal opinion is, why are you still limiting PACs from unions and whatnot? Because they still have to be a separate pot of money from the union. They won't let a union spend money unless it's in a separate pot.
Right.
Which is so, hypocrisy abounds in
Yeah.
the United States.
Well, I just want to bring up, I have this book here. It's called The Lincoln Miracle. It's by Edward Acorn. And it's about the 1860 convention, which nominated Abraham Lincoln to be the standard bearer for the Republican Party. And at that time, the Republican Party was throughout the North, and they were abolitionists. They were against slavery. They were pro-worker. They were against slavery. They didn't think human beings should be owned. And they were opposed by the Democrats, who were throughout the South in control of the South. And they also had some Democrats in the North. But it was assured that the Republican would probably win the election because the Northern Democrats were
Too small?
well, they were like in a division between the Southern Democrats. The Southern Democrats were of the mind, if they said if a Republican gets elected, we're seceding from the Union. You can't take slavery away from us. So now things sort of have flipped on their
this
end,
world.
on the end. Right now, the Republican Party is in control of the southern states. Yeah,
And
the
they
Demo-
want slavery.
and they're
Different form of
anti-union.
it.
They're
They're
anti-union, you know.
They aren't calling it that, but they want
They are.
slavery.
They are. When the union vote in Alabama went up, the governor and everybody came out and said, we don't want unions in here. You know, the Republicans were dead set against it. But we have a video that we wanted to show that's talking about a holiday that's coming up that has a lot to do with the Lincoln Miracle. It's this Wednesday, and it's Juneteenth. It's a national holiday. And let's learn a little bit about the history of Juneteenth.
My name is Marcia Chatlin. I'm a professor of history and African American studies at Georgetown University. I'm a historian of African American life and culture. Juneteenth is a commemoration holiday of June 19, 1865, when a group of African Americans in Galveston, Texas, received the news that they indeed were free. President Lincoln had signed the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, but news of the end of slavery in Texas had not traveled to this community until 1865. Since then, Juneteenth has been a day of commemoration of the struggle against slavery and a celebration of freedom. One of the biggest misconceptions about Juneteenth is that people often think that was the day that slavery ended in the United States. But in fact, the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery in the United States, was passed in the Senate on April 8, 1864, and the House on January 31st, 1865. Although Juneteenth celebrates the knowledge that slavery had ended, it's important to remember that the conditions that mirrored slavery, whether it was Jim Crow or the suppression of civil rights or continued struggles to fight racism, those continued after the end of slavery. And so the Juneteenth holiday reminds us of where we've come, and it also inspires us to think about the places we want to go. As African Americans left the South to pursue opportunities throughout the 20th century in northern and western cities, the celebration of Juneteenth moved from being a Texas-based celebration to a national one, in which people gathered with families and friends and community to remember the incredible struggle of a people against slavery and to create new traditions about the struggle for civil rights and the ongoing struggle against racism. Although slavery was abolished in 1865, the fight for civil rights has continued to the present day. So Juneteenth provides people with a sense of encouragement and inspiration to continue to fight on behalf of their community and their families for freedom. And it also is a holiday that, as it continues to become more and more popular, it allows people to look back at the past and encourages them to learn more about African American history. As more and more institutions recognize Juneteenth and work to commemorate the incredible legacy of slavery in the United States, I hope Juneteenth becomes a day where people commit not only to acts of justice in their local community, but to investigate history in a more deep and thoughtful way.
What did you
support
think of that? What did you think of that?
I think without history, you are doomed to repeat yourself. And we're in a cycle of repeating because where are they going? They're attacking education and history. They want to change history. And if they get to the power base that they want to, that'll be the first holiday they knock off the plate.
Yeah, it's interesting how, go ahead.
Yeah. I think that's a valid, more than valid point, is to celebrate this June 15th. And I just think that it's, is this something that just came about? I did watch the video this holiday. Was this in effect for a long time, or did this?
It was a state one in Texas for a very long
Texas.
time. It became a national one. Joe Biden signed it,
Yes.
so it's only a couple of years old.
It's only a couple of years.
So it is a vulnerable holiday if you think about it, because of, I mean, they've never taken one away, but given the Supreme Court's overturning of Roe versus Wade, the unthinkable can happen.
Yes.
these days.
One thing that I draw, about this video, when it talked about, it went from slavery, where the slave owners, they were compensated. The federal government paid them. You gave them compensation after those slaves were released. They got compensation from the federal government because the slaves were released. And there's a recent podcast that I listened to that one black man who obtained freedom, and then he bought slaves himself. So he was able to get money because of the fact that he had freed slaves, but he bought family members, so they were freed. He got money from the federal government. But the slaves were once promised, 30 acres and a mule when they were set free, but they never got that 30 acres and a mule. And then what happened was the Reconstruction was thwarted, and then the whites took over the South, forcing a lot of blacks to move north. And it wasn't until the Civil Rights Movement came around that they started to get the right to vote again in the South. And when we talked about fascism, that was very key because there were a lot of black soldiers that fought in World War II against Nazis, fascists, that claimed that they were the superior race, the super race. And the blacks went and they fought with the United States Army against Germany, came home to a country where they didn't have the right to vote, where they were shot if they tried to vote after they came home, as a World War II veteran. You know, they were shot. You know, so that's what brought forth. They said we're not the World War I blacks that came back and just went back to it. We fought for freedom for the entire Europe. We want freedom here in America. So, you know, that's it has that tie-in. And we have a few minutes. I wanted to show, because this is being continued by Dr. Reverend
He's continuing the fight.
William Barber is continuing the fight, and he's trying to bring people together. So let's watch the video from Morning Joe, where he appeared talking about his march coming up on the 29th.
Welcome back to Morning Joe. Our next guest argues that it is economic status that's dividing our country and directly influencing race relations today. The new book is titled White Poverty: How Exposing Myths About Race and Class Can Reconstruct American Democracy. It details how elites have worked to divide the poor of all races in order to maintain an economic structure that only benefits the top. Joining us now, the book's co-author, Reverend Dr. William J. Barber. He is directly working to end that division, organizing a movement of America's working class to make their needs heard and force Washington to act. Reverend, thank you so much for being here this morning. I know this is your life's work. Tell us more about the book, because I think that the title and the premise will take some by surprise.
Well, it probably will. The first time that I went on a poverty tour back in early 2000, had a state legislature said there aren't that many poor people. And since that time, we've really been studying and asking for an analysis. You know, if you look at the government's poverty measure, it would often say it's just about 30-some million poor people. And then most of the time, the picture you would see was a black woman on welfare. That picture both demeans black people and it dismisses tens of millions of white people. The fact of the matter is, in raw numbers, the majority of poor and low-wage people are white people and white women. So in my book, I say that this false portrayal is a lie. More than that, it's a damn lie, and it actually creates division. When one of the unifying factor is 135 million poor and low-wage people in this country today, over 40% of our population, and in voting, poor people now represent 30% of the electorate, and in so-called battleground states, they represent over 40% of the electorate. This book, I take an opportunity at lifting up white people who are in various places from Appalachia, showing the connections between white and black, and how we live in these myths, 4 myths. Pale skin is a shared interest. Only black people want change. Poverty is a black issue, and we can't overcome divisions. The fact of the matter is we can, we must, and we have to in this culture.
Reverend, is it not a political strategy that really was playing blacks against whites to put the black face out there and make us synonymous with poverty, ignoring whites, and then it was like us against them? You grew up in a movement like I did. You grew up in NAACP. I grew up with, among others, Reverend Jesse Jackson, that always tried to say that we have more in common than we have apart. How do we break that cycle, given this kind of Trump cult that's out there now, to make people understand that we are each other's answer or solution? We're not each other's problem. They're playing both of us for those that want to make billions of dollars and get tax cuts. You
know, Martin King said in '65, at the end of the Selma to Montgomery March, when he spoke on the steps of the Alabama State House, that the fear of the racist oligarchy in this country was for the masses of poor Negroes and the masses of poor white people to come together, form a voting bloc that could fundamentally shift the economic architecture. The truth of the matter is, we also got to tell the right story. People say poor people vote against their own interests, poor white. First of all, the numbers show us the majority of poor people do not vote regressive. They tend to vote progressive. Secondly, we've got to understand that there's a large swath. The biggest swing voters in this country, according to Celinda Lake and people like this, are poor white and black folk. over 30 million who are infrequent voters. And the number one reason, Reverend Al, that they don't vote is they say nobody talks to them. They don't hear themselves in the ads. They don't hear themselves in the debates. We had 15 presidential debates. Nobody talked about poor and low-wage folk. Nobody talks to them. Nobody listens to them. So what they're saying is now we're coming together, which is why on June 29th, there's going to be a mass poor people, low-wage workers moral march on Washington and to the polls in an effort to reach 15 million poor and low-wage people. What I'm saying in this book is let's deal with all of America's poor and stop treating this as it is an anomaly, that it is a crisis. You got 40% of this country poor and low wealth. This is a crisis that we need to look at totally and not one side or the other.
The new book is titled White Poverty, How Exposing Myths About Race and Class Can Reconstruct American Democracy. It goes on sale tomorrow. Reverend William Barber, thank you so much. And Mika, this is certainly such an important and interesting subject, one we'll be following very closely.
You know,
Oh,
there's a, tonight you can live stream the Poor People's Campaign website at the Poor People's Campaign website tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Okay.
So, but, you know, that's it in a nutshell, you know.
Well, yeah, well.
If poor people got together and started voting and voting,
Oh, yeah.
voted,
If poor people all, they said, all got together at one time,
grab your mic.
it's the power of the number.
Mike, you don't have your mic on. What Mike Wilber's trying to say while he's putting his mic on is that
Well,
if
just
four
hold it up,
people
that's
voted
okay.
in one block, that, and if you did it consistently, you would be the voice of America as
Yeah.
opposed to anything else, because corporations are not big enough to do it on their own.
See, the biggest problem we have, really, you know, you've got to get the people who can vote one-on-one, and usually it's going to be the people on the bottom, the economic bottom. And it's tough to get them together as a unit and vote. You know, I feel like, next guy take care of it. Yeah, the next guy's not doing a good job.
No, the next guy never comes.
Got to
in.
get the people out, got to knock on their doors, tell our friends and neighbors, get out and vote.
And we actually have to talk
Yeah.
to them, you know, hear their concerns,
Yeah.
you know.
There was one part that he said about like community and welfare, but there was a lot of white people that are on welfare, also mothers with children, and I don't know what they do nowadays, but in the 70s they had the WIN program where you could actually go to college and get off of welfare. And I don't know what the, now that I think that they just say you have to get a job after the child is 6 years old. I don't know, I haven't followed it all
Right.
these years.
But what we do know is education is key.
Yes,
Yes,
that's what
you
I'm
know.
saying.
In
yeah.
knowledge, there's virtue in knowledge, there's goodness in knowledge, there's strength in knowledge, and there's freedom in knowledge. And we advocate for that. And that's how we're going to get out of poverty, is educate ourselves and educate the rest of the country to the needs of those of the poor. Because like Liz said, let's ask them, because
Ask
they have a
them, yeah.
better understanding, I think, of what's wrong in this country and what needs to be done than those on the top that are
Oh,
deciding,
definitely.
Deciding
you know,
what.
where to spend their millions here or there or go
Here
out
and
in
there.
space
No,
or
they don't
whatever.
even- they don't
We
even
want
have the
power
real
to the
world.
people, we want
Power to the people.
solidarity.
We
Solidarity.
definitely do. And remember, poverty is the enemy.
Poverty is the enemy.
There's